Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Thank you for being there. This week we're chatting to Alan Rhode about his new political thriller, The Eagle and the Cockerel. We talk about why concentration is subjective. Also, how writing in a second language makes things a bit tricky. And he shares parts of the writing code that he sticks to.
Rule number 1, writing every day. Writing or editing every day. And this is the rule that I never break. I feel guilty if at the end of the day I haven't done anything. And because I have quite a demanding family life, sometimes it's difficult for me to be constant, but every day I manage to write, and every day I manage to... I want at the end of the day to feel the sensation, okay, I've moved forward today.
It's all on the way with Alan Rhode in this week's Writer's Routine. This week's episode is sponsored by Faber Academy, whose flagship course is back. It's the Writing a Novel course that you can get onto in person if you're in the UK, or you'll be here for about 6 months, and even online if you're a little further afield. The course is a 6-month programme of sessions that cover all the essentials of novel writing. Character, story, structure, plotting, voice, dialogue, the whole thing is in there. Now, this podcast lets you hear from some of the best authors around. This course can really help you become one yourself. Over 150 graduates from the Writing a Novel course have gone on to secure a publication deal, and some huge names in there too. Maddie Mortimer, who brought us maps of our spectacular bodies, Nicola Dinan with Bellies, and of course S.J. Watson with Before I Go to Sleep, which became a huge movie. Remember that? Well, they all graduated from the Faber Academy's Writing a Novel course. And through the 6 months, you'll hear from guest speakers, some of the biggest names in publishing, authors, editors. The course has been designed to help you hone your craft and find direction. And Faber Academy have been doing this for a little while. Their experts have really helped curate the perfect way to get you writing a novel. And, well, if you need any more proof... But just think back to some of the authors we've had on this show who cannot speak highly enough about the Faber Academy. Now's your chance to be one of them. And at the end of the course, really setting you up, part of your work is sent out to agents across the UK. You've got the chance to pitch your novel to some of the biggest literary agents around too. Now, there are courses in Newcastle up north and in London, which start in October. There is an online course too that you can take part in wherever you are. And you need to be quick to sign up. Deadlines for both are on the 15th and 16th of September. So if you'd like to get some more help to put the finishing touches on how you write a novel, maybe even to take you from the ground up. You've heard so many episodes of this show and you're thinking now might be the perfect chance. You can find out more. The course is open. It starts in a few weeks. So have a think. You can find out more. Get to faberacademy.com/writing-a-novel. Give a search, Faber Academy, Writing a Novel course, and it'll all be there for you. Yes, welcome along to the show. This is Writer's Routine, where we take a look through an author's working day. My name is Dan Simpson. This week on the podcast, we're with Alan Rhode. Alan, who has done a bit of everything, really. He works as a lawyer, has been a journalist, and now has published The Eagle and the Cockerel. It's a tale of political games, of treachery, and a completely different Europe. It was shortlisted for the 2024 Selfie Book Awards, which recognised the best self-published works around. Alan was born in a pretty chilled out part of Italy and then moved to London in 2015, and he started businesses. He's been busy, he's got a young family, and then in his 40s became an author. Now, he's a determined guy. The fact that he self-published this, I think, explains what you need to know about his ambitions. And he's pretty honest and upfront about this during the show, about his goals and about why he started writing. You can hear all about the old movies that inspired a very specific part of what he does. Also how he balances writing and working and family life, and even in all that, how he thinks his kids are working together against him. You can hear why his guilt is intrinsic to the writing process. Also, if you're in the UK, a little flashback, about 5 years, you'll be delighted to hear that Brexit is back on the table in the chat, because the novel, The Eagle and the Cockerel, is a political thriller. It's based on a true story to unite Germany and France and create a brand new European superpower. And he started thinking about this novel back end of the 2010s, when we were still all a fuss with Brexit. So you can hear how that influenced everything. It's not too much, though, I promise. We also talk about writing a political thriller and why the lack of references for him in that genre was a very good thing, and why he wants to write a lot more and step outside of his comfort zone. So let's get into it then with Alan Rhode, and we start things off, as always, with what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
I'm in my garden studio. And I love writing here. I also like to write in coffee shops, but because occasionally I prefer to have people around me. But the garden studio is in the middle of my garden, so I'm in touch with nature, which is very important. I have 3 olive trees right in front of me. I grew up in Italy, so olive trees are probably the most common kind of tree you can find in Italy, especially where I grew up next to the sea. Then I can see from time to time there is a cat who strolls around the garden. Then on my left I have 3 movie picture posters, Stand By Me, Pulp Fiction, and The Shawshank Redemption. Behind me, I have 1 poster of, I think is a penguin cover for Brighton Rock by Graham Greene. So it's a source of inspiration. And then on my right, there is a corner where my wife manages, she's not here right now, but she has her own startup in fashion. And she holds some of the stock here in the garden studio, Italian silk scarves. So, and then I have pictures of my children, and I have some copies of my book that I use for PR purposes on my left, and that's pretty much everything. So it's a quiet place. It's a quiet place for me to write, but I also like to write occasionally. I can go to coffee shops. I like the sound of the coffee machines. I like a bit of music in the background. I like to see people moving around me. So it's a half-half. I would say half of the time I'm writing in my garden studio, and half of the time maybe outside. But I believe that you can write pretty much everywhere. I think concentration is extremely subjective. I love to write on planes during flights, because nobody is going to bother you with a mobile, and I think that if you write on a plane, you are in a bit of a bubble. You're in the sky, and that's another environment where I like to write.
There's a lot to pick up on there, Alan. So right at the start, you said that you like to be around nature. Like, even though you're in your office, but it's in the garden, but you like to just be amongst it. Why is that? Why is that important to you?
For me, it's like a breath of fresh air. I love flowers. It's quite funny because, as I said before, I grew up in Italy, and I think that in Italy we don't have the same relationship with nature that people in the UK have. So I know how Britons are keen with the gardens and going to the countryside, or the country as they call it here. In Italy, I think, especially if you live in a large city, I grew up in Genoa, it's 500,000 people, so it's rather not large, but it's medium large. And we didn't have the same relationship with nature. So the contact with nature is something I discovered more here in the UK, and it's impressive. I mean, the flowers you see in gardens or next to doors. I mean, it gives me peace of mind. And as a writer, I think you definitely need peace of mind. So it's good. It's good if I can see my lawn. I'm a bit lazy, so I probably don't maintain my lawn in the same way my neighbors do. But still it's grass, and it's very green. And the upside of the constant rain in the UK is the greenery that all this rain produces. So
you also said concentration is subjective, which is an interesting phrase I've never heard before. I know that some authors can be quite particular and precious about when they can be creative, when they can concentrate. If you're able to do it more or less anywhere, is there anything you need around you to help you tap into that mode of concentrating?
Not really. I think the only important thing is just to focus on writing. So I tend to switch off my mobile, because the mobile can be very detrimental, or I mean, all these notifications we receive through computers, I tend to switch off everything. That's my only condition. But then it's not a problem if there is a bit of a noise outside, and I don't need to be in a very, very peaceful, quiet place. And I remember, Richard Branson, the entrepreneur, the businessman, he once said that he has a to-do list, like everybody else, but he puts all his reminders, business and personal reminders, in the same to-do list. And it seems something a bit, I don't know, distracting. It seems something counterintuitive, but it works for him. It worked very well in his career. So, and another thought of mine, when I write, I bring the childish side of my person outside. And children, by definition, they are noisy, they're a bit untidy, they're not really orderly. So it's not that my desk is a mess. I like to keep things tidy. But if you want to bring your childish side out, probably too many rules would hinder this kind of process, if you follow me. So I'm not, compared to other writers you interviewed, I'm probably more on the unruly side, but it still works for me. I mean, I think that my productivity flows out better if I don't have too many rules. And I can find concentration rather easily, and it's subjective. It's probably a gift I have. But of course, then you need rules. As a writer, you need rules, because otherwise you will never end the project. But I find concentration quite easy to reach.
So you've mentioned what's around you, Alan, and there's some inspirational things there in your garden office, books that just helps remind you what you've done. But what about something that's more practical? You come from a law background, which that's quite a thorough profession. So I'm wondering, do you have a plan? Do you have a whiteboard? Are there Post-it notes that let you know what you're doing?
I have one. It's like a notebook, which I ordered from Germany. It's customized with my name on the cover, and I use it to write down notes for my books. But I don't use it as often as I probably should. So I've tried to streamline my creative process on more than one occasion, but I always gave up. So, for instance, I'm now writing a second book. I'm halfway through it, and I'm trying to publish at the end of 2025. So it's not so far away. And what I done for this book, I had this A3 sheet of paper, and I had as many boxes as many chapters I wanted in the book. And I said, okay, I will write in each box the summary of a chapter. But then I gave up because what I usually do when I write a book, I have 6, 7, 8 key points, milestones, call them as you wish. And I start from there. So I have a beginning. I know what is going to happen in 3, 4 key moments throughout the book. And I usually have an idea of the end of the book. But then I connect the dots. So compared to other authors like John Grisham, when he starts a book, he already knows where he's going to, chapter after chapter. So he he's very micromanaging the writing process. In my case, it's a good half of the book, or even 2/3 of the book. They take shape while I'm writing, and so it's more an instinctive kind of approach to the writing process. I have rules, as I said before. I would say rule number 1: writing every day, writing or editing every day. And this is the rule that I never break. I feel guilty if at the end of the day I haven't done anything. And because I have quite a demanding family life, sometimes it's difficult for me to be constant. But every day I manage to write, and every day I manage to... I want at the end of the day to feel the sensation, okay, I've moved forward today. I haven't been standing still. And that's my main rule. Probably the only rule I have. And then, yeah, of course, I have my own... technically, I'm not a native English speaker, even if my books are in English. And it's a bit of a challenge for me, an additional challenge. So I guess I probably need 20% more time than if I was writing in Italian.
Just let me ask a question on that for a second, Alan. This might be such a naive question. Are you thinking everything through in Italian first and translating it in your head, or you're thinking it through in English? It just takes you a little while to figure out what it is you're trying to say.
Yeah, it's the second answer. So I think in English. Probably takes me longer to because my way of thinking is probably more basic than the way I need to write a book. I mean, if we wrote as we speak, the books would be very boring. So you need to make it. You need to write in a more sophisticated way, not to get the reader bored. So it takes me a bit longer. And then it's funny, for instance, in my first book, I wanted to find one word to express a strange way a woman had her haircut was, her hair fashion was. And then I found the word bouffant. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing well. It seems French more than English. But and it took me probably a year and a half to find this word. And then very casually I was writing another book or an article, I don't remember, and I found this word and said, oh, that's what I meant for a year and a half. So in Italian, probably it's easier for me to find the right word or to structure the sentence as I want from the start.
You're moving into your second book, as you mentioned, and this type of writing is completely different, I would imagine, from many of the stuff you were doing as a lawyer. So it's a different part of your brain to train with the knowledge, with the vocabulary you need. Have you found yourself improving on it in your second book? Is it quicker to find that word?
Yes. So just to clarify, my first book, was published last year, it's a geopolitical thriller. And besides being a former lawyer, I've been a financial journalist too in Italy. So my first book has a journalistic kind of tone throughout it, because it's a political thriller with a lot of backstory and research. So I was playing home with that book. This second book is more dystopian. It's set in a future where human beings are living indoor, within walls, because of an environmental kind of situation. So I'm not employing a journalistic tone in this second book, and it's written in a first person, so it's more kind of intimate approach. I think I'm improving with practice, as everybody does in all kind of crafts and trades and sports. I mean, the more time you spend, the more effort you put in something, you naturally improve. So I read a lot. I used to read magazines and newspapers, Now I tend to read more novels, fiction. I definitely need to read a lot of fiction to improve. What Stephen King said in his book on writing, his memoir, he always said, if your writings are not up to your expectation, if your books or stories are not up to your expectation, it's because it's either you didn't write enough during your life or you haven't read enough. So I wrote a lot. I read many newspapers and magazines and law books, of course. I think I needed to read more fiction, especially contemporary fiction, because in Italy we tend to read a lot of classics. But it's important, if you live now, you also need to read what your contemporaries are writing. So now I'm focusing on reading contemporary books, and it's astonishing how many writers you can find, and they all have their own say. So I switch more from reading classics to contemporary authors, and clearly it's helping me to improve my own writing. And so I'm to answer your question in a short way. Yes, I think I'm improving, and I'm writing more faster, and I tend to stick to an idea of 400, 500 words per day. Sometimes I manage to write less or more, sometimes less, but I'm trying to write 400, 500 words per day. And other authors, I don't know, for Anthony Horowitz, I saw him at the Barnes Book Festival a couple of years ago, and he writes 2,000, 3,000 words per day. I don't know how he can manage it, but everybody has his own speed and his own way of writing. For me, 400, 500 words per day is already quite a commitment. Everything gets in a way. So because my children, one is 3 years old, the other is 5, one of them, I think they coordinate themselves. One of them is going to wake up at 6 a.m., or even earlier. So for me, unfortunately, what is the most productive part of the day for many writers is not really available to me. So, and then I have other engagements. So usually as a writer, I tend to start writing the early afternoon. So after our interview, I will begin writing immediately for a couple of hours. Then I will go to pick up my son from the school. And I don't want a divorce, so I need to spend time with a family. I will resume writing most likely around 9 p.m. or late, even later, to do a bit of editing. So for me, I tend to write 2 or 3 hours per day, but I wish I could write much more. In my ideal world, I would probably write in the morning 4 hours, and then in the afternoon I would probably watch old movies. I love old vintage movies, and or read other books. But what I've come to learn, the more movies for me, it's like it's a source of inspiration, and unfortunately, I think the best way to watch movies is in movie theaters, because you have a different sound, you are far away from reality. It's completely different than watching a movie in your own living room. And for instance, I found a couple of places in London. I live in London. Some places, they play old movies with an old film. So you still hear the sound of the film while it's being projected. There is one place in Hackney, I think. It's called Castle Cinema. And they have these old movies from the 60s, 70s, even the 50s. And it's 1 hour by overground from here, so it's a bit tricky for me to reach that place. But I notice how immediately, if I watch a movie, especially an old one, some idea will prove very useful for my books. and probably because everybody has a different life, but we tend to live a life which is a bit standard, in the sense that we talk to people of our own era, of our own century, or while with old movies, you can relive the past. With books too, but with movies, you can relive the past, seeing how people spoke 30, 40 years, 50 years ago. You can see different colors. You can see, you can live another life in a way, live in another society. So it's helping with productivity. Because I think that one problem we have nowadays, and it's a universal problem, we all tend to listen to the same music, dress in the same way, eating the same food because of globalization, because of how trade is working nowadays. So to have a small window in your life, like an old movie, an old book, a painting, whatever, which allows you to escape from the daily routine, I think it's very good for your own productivity. I mean, at least for me, it works this way. So I'm trying to find ways to improve my creativity through these different sources of inspiration, and old movies or books or whatever. So I don't know how I came to discuss about.
That's okay.
I think it was my daily
that's
routine.
where we were. But so listen, I know that your working is quite fragmented, because you can only kind of sit down and work when you've got a free bit of time, apart from late in the evening. How do you give yourself the best chance of being productive in those moments? You said you're quite free and loose with what it is you're going to write, but do you? How tightly are you working off a plan when you sit down? Have you started the next page so you know where you're leaving off? When you are sat there and you know that you're going to write, what do you do?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I believe in what Hemingway said, that if you are sometimes writing for me is tough. It's like trying to cut stone, and sometimes it's like trying to cut butter. So it's much easier. I tend to drop the pen, let's say, when I'm in a good situation. So I tend to leave something for the day after. I don't have many rules. I like writing because it allows me to explore. I want to make an example, for instance. For my first book, at a certain point, I wasn't really stuck, but I didn't have any idea for a short moment. And so I said, let's have two characters stroll through Paris. The book is partially set in Paris. So I took Google Maps and I started a journey through Paris on Google Maps, when you can see the Google you can see the image taken from cars. And I went through Paris and I found this building who had a strange story. It was a building where Baudelaire and other authors used to smoke hashish and meet and discuss about. It was not just Baudelaire, other journalists, painters, and I took inspiration. And this building, I don't mention the name of the building, but I mention the story of the building. And I went inside the building through some website, and I mentioned the interior design, the decor of the building, which is a very old and characteristic building, full of gold, paintings, mirrors, in the book. And then when I went to Paris, because I wanted to pay a visit to Paris before the book was published, I tried to sneak into the building, but it was closed to the public, unfortunately, for a private event. For me, it's very important to explore. So my writing process is a process of exploration, of research, That's the common trait of all my writing sessions. That's why I want to keep rules, to limit the number of rules. I just need concentration. I usually start, if I'm throughout a chapter, I will probably start rereading the chapter from the very beginning. This is what Hemingway did. So I'm not starting the writing process by writing. I'm starting the writing process by reading the full chapter I'm focusing on. And my chapters are usually not very long, so it's going to be max 2, 3, 4,000 words that I read, and then I continue the chapter. So I start the writing process by reading, and then at a certain point I feel when I'm a bit tired or when I'm losing concentration, and so at that point probably I will do a bit of editing, or another thing, I will pick up a book and read that book maybe for 20 minutes, and then I will feel slightly guilty because I'm reading and not writing, and I will be back to a writing process. So I would say my writing process involves reading my own book and someone else's book. And now I'm reading in Spanish a lot because I'm trying to learn Spanish. That is very similar to Italian. So it's a low-hanging fruit for an Italian Spanish. So I'm reading in Spanish actually right now. And who knows, maybe in 20 years' time I will be writing in Spanish. Who knows?
More from Alan in just a second. This week's episode of the podcast is supported by Faber Academy, whose flagship course, It's Writing a Novel course, is back. You can find out more. There's some spaces left if you want to make the most of the course, which starts in about a month's time. Get to faberacademy.com/writing-a-novel. You just search Faber Academy Writing a Novel course and it will come up online. Now, if you would like to sponsor the show, well, you can do that by helping us out over on our Patreon page. There is always space to talk about your book. If you have published something, if you think it deserves much more praise and plugging that it deserves, well, you can let me do it for you. I know it's a tough old world out there on the shelves, and I will dedicate so much time to talking about your story. If you'd like to make that happen, as I say, you can support us over on our Patreon page. There is also a chance for you to get merch. There is bonus content. You can be part of our writing community there, and it is the easiest way for you to support what we do. It doesn't cost a lot, just a few dollars a month. It really helps us going. It helps me bring you these chats with some of the greatest authors around as often as we can. If you'd like to get involved with that side of things, please do support us and become a backer over at patreon.com/writersroutine. Let's get back to it with Alan Rhode, then chatting about his new political thriller, The Eagle and the Cockerel. We chat about his goals and what he wants to do with a new career as a novelist. Also about writing a political thriller and why the lack of classic quotes, references for him was a good thing. And we get back to it, talking about how being busy, and we've heard that he is, and he's got a lot going on. So why, with all of that, has he been so keen to get a book published?
Oh, I can be quite blunt. I want to bring my life to a next level. And my dream is to be, I always dreamed to become, when I was a child, I want to be a movie director, then a journalist. It was very clear to me. And then I've been a journalist in Italy, but I was not happy about the problem with journalists. I don't think you're very free to write. So you have guidelines from the newspaper or magazine where you write. And then even if you write what you want to write, the title of the article is chosen by the deputy editor or somebody in the newsroom. So, and the title is 90% of an article. And even if you're free to write, you always seek for the news. And if you're looking for the news, there is always a bit of manipulation of reality. The good thing with fiction, you have to manipulate reality. You have to invent stories because it's what fiction is about. So I decided to start writing actually in 2015 books, but I was getting married. I was very busy with my job, so I left a couple of times. So I had this false start. The book was this, The Eagle and the Cockerel, which is inspired by a true story. The Chancellor of Germany, Adenauer, in 1951, after the war, proposed to an American news outlet. He said during an interview, and he was damn serious, he said, France and Germany should get united in a single country, because Germany was at the risk of seeing all the industries being dismantled. It was after the war, you can imagine, and France was in tatters. So it was a way out of a very difficult situation from Germany. And Adenauer was an old-style politician. He was not looking for sound bites like it happens nowadays. So if he said that twice within a short period, he meant it. And strange enough, nobody picked the news, at least just this American outlet. But you don't find this proposal of unifying France and Germany into a single country in history books, or it's relatively unknown. So I started from there the story about a referendum in the future on the unification of France and Germany. But I quit a couple of times because I didn't feel I could commit myself 100% on a book. And then in early 2020, it doesn't have anything to do with COVID. I said, it's now or never. I already felt a bit guilty because I was already in my 40s. And so I said, okay, let's start now. Let's have a basic rule, writing every day. I was scared of not making it, but eventually I made it. And now my goal is to reach 10 books under my belt. So I wish to reach one day, look at my bookshelf or my Kindle or wherever and say, okay, I've published 10 books. Possibly every book different from the other. So the first book is a geopolitical thriller. The second book is a thriller, but in a dystopian environment. There is no trace of politics inside my second book. I want to prove to myself and to the readers that I can diversify. So I will not stick to the same kind of template for my second book. And I have ideas for a third and a fourth book. I look forward to starting them after the second book is completed. And they are all different. So I'm trying to not to repeat myself.
So with The Eagle and the Cockerel, then, you have this idea. Well, you've read this article, you've learned about this part of history. And I know that you don't thoroughly plan. You like an idea, but what are you doing before you actually start typing that first sentence? What research are you doing to gather everything you need?
Brexit was approaching, the referendum, because as I said before, I started in 2015. So I went to the London School of Economics. They have a wonderful library, and I get some research there. And I said, okay, let's have... Adenauer had proposed to unify France and Germany. Brexit was approaching, so I thought, let's have a referendum. And then I said, okay, but it can't be a referendum the old way with a ballot or the postal vote. It must be a referendum, a digital referendum. Okay, e-voting is something which is already available in some countries, Finland, for instance. And I said, okay, not a referendum, not just an online referendum. Let's make it a poll on a social media platform. And then I thought, okay, let's make a social media platform, a dominating kind of social media platform, because we are in an era where most of us are concerned that a single platform could gain such an economic strength that things get out of hand. So it's a social media platform called Rome. And why Rome? Not because I grew up in Italy, because Rome is where fascism started in a way, and fascism had huge ties with the Roman Empire in terms of the myth of the symbols. So I said, let's call it Rome, written all in capital letters, so it's a bit scarier. And then it goes from there. And then very important for me was at the very beginning, I wanted two opposing characters. One character is a modern day politician who would do everything to save his career, to fulfill his ambition. He's a former mayor of Paris. They call him branding himself because he's very keen on dressing properly. He's a bit like a political superstar. And he's the man who is pursuing this dream of Charlemagne, the new superpower coming out of a union of Germany and France, by one side. And clearly he's the guy against Europe, against the European Union. And then by the other side, you have the opposing character, a girl from Italy who lives in Birmingham, and she has a very famous news logger, and she's obsessed with fact-checking. And she's in deep love with Europe because she spent some time in Brussels. So they're clearly opposing characters. Their lives are completely different. Their relationship with their families, their stories, completely different. But it gave me the opportunity to write down for children, for instance, for kids, two opposing views about Europe. So the view of the so-called sovereignist, they antepose their own country, and they see Europe as a source of bureaucracy and Brussels and whatever. And then there is this girl, Lucia, and she loves Europe, and she believes that Europe can bring further integration between people. She's a bit more, at a certain point, the French politician calls her the woke warrior. So she's more on the left-leaning side of politics. And then you have a debate. I don't want to spoil the story, but I think my book is a good way. You can have fun. It's rich with twists, but also it's a good way to learn more about the history of Europe and learn more about the pros and cons of the European Union. So, and the connection with Brexit is clear. Indeed, most of my haters on social media, they are Brexiteers, and they think my book is a bit cheesy. It's a funny play of words. They say not Remainer, Remona, which is European Remona. One person called me, and I think it's a funny way of putting it. So it's politics mixed with action and plot.
You knew, and you very clearly, that this was a political thriller. So I guess what tricks and tropes, what themes of political thrillers did you thread through this novel, and how did you come to learn what other political thrillers used as well?
That's a difficult point, because I think that political fiction as a genre has been neglected. When I talk about political fiction, for me, political fiction means a book where you really feel, a bit like in House of Cards, the movie, you feel in the same room where decisions are taken. You feel, you can sense the political strategies adopted. So a spy story is not a political thriller for me, even if sometimes politics is involved. So I struggle to find many references. For me, George Orwell is clearly a case of political fiction, 1984 or Animal Farm, Robert Harris. I mean, there are some authors, but the book I was writing was a book I couldn't find on the bookshelves. So that's for me, and maybe the downside, okay, I didn't have so much references to take inspiration from by one side, but maybe I'm not sounding very humble now, but the lack of references was enable me to create my tiny niche, probably. And I think one aspect of this book is very hard to label this book. When I spoke to the publisher, when I spoke to editors, they said, one editor, and I take it as a compliment, she said, I don't know what I've just read, but I like it, regarding the first manuscript. So as long as people like the book, is fine. Probably is cross-genre, is a bit literary, is a bit cross-genre. As I said before, sometimes for an unknown reason, a genre for some time is a bit neglected. Like Western movies, of course, it was a huge genre in the 60s. Then there was a period without Western movies. And then we had another period, like in the 90s, with 5-6 major Western movies. And then again, nothing for a period. I think with political fiction is the same. It's a genre that can be rekindled, in my opinion. And in this period, probably the real politics is even crazier than books. So maybe we don't need so many books about politics in terms of fiction, because the reality seems fictional. Look what is going on in the US, where you have a candidate who leaves the run to become president because he's struggling during debates, and they waited the very last moment to change the candidate. So, or look what happened in the UK, where you had 4 or 5 prime ministers within a very short time frame, and one prime minister lasted a couple of months, even less. So I think politics everywhere, and in Italy even more, goes beyond the realm of fiction. It's very wide and unpredictable. But political fiction is a genre that can be, I think we should have more authors dealing with political fiction nowadays, especially because people love fiction. You go to politics. You go to Waterstones, or any other bookstore. You see how many books about political history are published throughout the year. So people in the UK too, they like politics. So there is no reason for having, which is, we need more books in terms of political fiction. In my opinion, there is a bit of a gap, as I say.
And that is it for this week's episode of the show with Alan Rhode. The new book is The Eagle and the Cockerel. You can get a copy all about United Europe, what could have been, online now, wherever you get your stories. This week's episode of the podcast is supported by Faber Academy. Their writing a novel course is back, starting in October. In person in Newcastle and in London, and if you're a bit further afield, they've got an online course to find out more. Deadlines in the middle of September. Have a look. Get to faberacademy.com/writing-a-novel. And we'll be back next week on the podcast with more from the best writers around. If you can, drop us a follow on X. We are at WritersPod there. You can always get in touch at writersroutine.com. And one more link, if you'd like to support the show, it's patreon.com/writersroutine. And I will see you next week. Bye.